Hi everyone, welcome to week 7, DECODE Silicon Valley Startup Success. This week the topic will be enterprise business. Next slides, please. Same with our usual agenda, we will start with the 15 to 20 minutes topic overview, and then we'll have an hour speakers keynote session, and then today we have Kenny, and then the last 30 minutes will be logistics, and then discussion for breakout rooms.
All right, so let's begin with some interesting food for thought. So let's acknowledge that, first of all, not all startups are going to turn out like Instagram did. The point that we're trying to get across today is that not all startups can be seen and used by consumers like us every day. And so with that, let's transition to this concept of B2B. All right, so B2B, as I said, or business to business, is essentially the exchange of products and services or information, or something like e-commerce would be an example of this. And this would happen between businesses rather than the usual business to consumer B2C, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And when we talk about B2B, the term that gets thrown around a lot is SaaS, or software as a service. And we'll talk more about that specifically with a case study that Jim will talk about Salesforce later. But in terms of B2B, some examples would be Dropbox, Amazon Business specifically, and Zoom can also be an example. So this graphic right here shows a really interesting chart we have over, oh, sorry, one second. Sorry about that. So this chart right here graphs, it's basically graphs from 2007 to 2017, and it takes in the quarterly data, and it's graphed against the trillions of dollars of spending in the United States. And so in this case, the red line symbolizes the consumer spending, or in this case, the gross private consumption expenditures, while the blue line is the business spending, or in this case, the B2B transactions. And at first glance, right off the bat, you'll be able to tell that the business spending is much higher. They have a higher volume than the B2C transactions. And in a nutshell, this is basically because B2B startups are startup friendly and they can make a lot of progress in a short amount of time because they have a bigger market with lots of opportunities as represented by the broad horizon. And it's also a better opportunity if you're going to build a startup in the near future. So just to reiterate, there's a lot of potential for B2B just because businesses can tend to spend a lot more than customers. And there are many untapped opportunities in B2B because it has a larger market. And so next off, we have this infographic displaying how B2B is typically monetized. And so to convey this information, this picture demonstrates how they're able to make money. And so the primary reason is that this upward trend in B2Bs compared to average consumer spending is that in a typical supply chain, we have a lot of different components. And in this case, this includes sales, design, building, deploying the product or service, and then fulfilling with the finished product to the end consumer. And then in comparison, just describing business to consumers to business models, just to highlight the differences. The first one is the customer acquisition. So typically customers are usually acquired through marketing strategies such as word of mouth, and they rely on social media a lot. And for enterprise startups, it's actually about selling a paid product. So they usually acquire their business through sales-oriented teams with separate sales strategies. Another main distinction is that with consumer startups, they typically have a larger target market. And so they're more focused on the sales aspect of that. And so usually this consists of a single decision maker that in comparison to enterprise startups, which have multiple decision makers. And products and services of enterprise startups typically have a longer gestation period due to the many levels of testing phases that are required. And also a main priority for these companies is high security, and that's pretty obvious, as any enterprise would want their sensitive data to be properly taken care of and properly stored within the application of the enterprise startup. The next point is growth. So the enterprise buying cycle is pretty slow as sales happen through building relationships with the business on a one-to-one basis. So you would expect it to be a slower process, and this does result in more sustainable growth, however. And lastly is trust. Another point I want to make is critical software designed for these businesses to use typically has greater repercussions with it. And if it crashes, compared to the effects of a personal consumer-focused software application, there's way bigger repercussions because of that. So that's also a key differentiator between B2C and B2B. And so basically, just to sum up everything I just said, enterprise business is more laborious, it's slower, it's a little more complex, but in the end, it is more sustainable and has more growth opportunities. And now I'll hand it over to Jin to talk a little bit about a case study with Salesforce.
Okay, so let's take a look of example of Salesforce. So the recent growth of B2B is largely driven by the adoption of software as a service or SaaS. And one notable example of an enterprise business is Salesforce. So traditional software was not really friendly for small and medium-sized enterprise. And because usually the price is very high, as well as the cost to manage and maintain the software, the data, it will also need to purchase corresponding hardware in order to run the software itself. So you could tell right away that that's pretty inefficient. Until Salesforce came along around 2003, they had the vision of software as a service. And like converting that as a platform as a service. Unlike many companies like Microsoft or Oracle, Salesforce, they never really mess with any of the physical products or the ASP infrastructure. They just brought all of the software to the cloud, and its app was delivered purely on the internet with the access in the browsers, which really transformed CRM and made software much easier to use. And as you can see in this graph, like 2003 on this graph, there's a huge boom, and Salesforce Go has exploded. So that's really great example of an enterprise business. So the next question is like, when is my startup business start to earning money? And like most of the B2B startups, they start by losing their money in first few years. And so as a founder, you might ask yourself, how do I know that my B2B can start making money? There are typically 5 metrics that we can use for any software as a service enterprise. The first one is MRR, which is referring to monthly recurring revenue. And some other companies also use annual recurring revenue. But your MRR is dependent on 3 different factors. The first one is churn, which is the loss of customer. These factors defines your average lifetime of your customer. And the second one is growth of your customer. And the last one would be new customer. You really want to look at like how much revenue our customers going to bring over the entire lifetime. So customer lifetime value. And then the last one is customer acquisition cost, which is just like how much do you spend in terms for sales or marketing to acquire a new customer. And these metrics are used by many VC firms. So this is just a quick summary of today's topic overview. B2B is a huge market that has a lot of potential. And as we saw, there are quite a few distinct features and trials for each startup.
Okay, and then we'll move on to the speaker's keynote session. For this week, we are really honored to have Kenny. Kenny leads people, finance, and operations at Coda, which is a new doc for teams that combines documents, spreadsheet, and application into a single canvas. As one of Coda's earliest employees, he helped the company grow from a private beta to a product used by more than 25,000 teams globally. In his role, he oversees finance, people, legal, and operations. Prior to Coda, Kenny led recruiting at Box, where he scaled the company from 40 to more than 1,200 employees. He's also a 2008 graduate of UC Berkeley, where he studied economics. And then welcome, Kenny.
Thank you, guys. Very excited to be here. Appreciate the foundation that was shared right now on enterprise software, and hopefully I will get you guys a little bit excited and seeing my point of view, which I think enterprise software is really fun and really sexy. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly, if that's okay.
Yes, I think you have the permission,
All right.
the access to share screen.
Yep, I just took over from you. Thanks, Serena.
Okay.
Can everyone see this okay?
Yep.
Cool. Let me arrange my Zoom tiles really quickly. All right, I'll kick things off with a quick intro. It feels like it was just yesterday when I was at Cal myself. I spent my freshman year living in Bowles Hall, which I hear now is much more modern and much nicer than when I was there. I did lots of, as many entrepreneurship things as I could on campus. My favorite memory was listening to the Hot or Not founder talk about how he rigged the servers in the computer science building to keep the site up all night in a hidden closet somewhere. I ended up writing my honors econ thesis about the liquidity drought in venture capital, which was one of the things that convinced me that enterprise software was pretty predictable and a good market to pursue. As opposed to at that time in tech, everyone was really, really excited about social gaming. My first job out of school was at a small executive recruiting company that I met during a Cal career fair. And the job there was helping build the engineering teams of early stage startups around Silicon Valley. It was a pretty fun time period in tech. I think Facebook was a pretty tiny and new product and company. Most of the world was still using BlackBerries, and it's fun to think how far we've come since then. I joined a company called Box, which back in the day was known as Box.net in 2010. And I ended up growing the company to about 1,200 people. But it was fun to remind people that when I joined Box, they were still a consumer company trying to shift to being an enterprise company. I'm pretty sure 99% of you have never had a MySpace account. But back in the day, MySpace was the hottest social network, and Box had a widget for MySpace because they were trying to get as many end users, kind of consumers, to use their product. They realized consumers did not want to pay for file storage and pivoted to focus on enterprise. And I think that was a really, really good decision for Box. I joined a company called Coda back in 2015. They used to be known as Krypton until we officially launched the business in 2019, but it's been a lot of fun. My role here is to run the entire G&A function, so finance, people, operations, etc. And in my spare time, I love staying close to the startup community, and I do some angel investing, and I teach a class to help other founders get really, really good at hiring, which I think helps a lot with some of the early stage challenges in companies. So I'm going to jump into a section now on why I personally love enterprise software, and if I could convince you as you're thinking about starting a business someday to pursue this category, I think there's a lot of reasons too. The first one I'll call out, I think consumers are really, really hard customers. They're very sought after in terms of mindshare. There's some really well-established products, companies, et cetera, that have captured most of their attention. So it's hard getting them to do different things. And they tend to be a little bit more cost conscious. They don't like to pay for things as much as businesses do. The next thing that was highlighted a little bit in the Enterprise Software Foundation was touching on this topic about software as a service as a business model. This kind of blew my mind when I realized like how lucrative SaaS can be. We now know it's much easier to deliver software over the cloud than kind of how they used to back in the day. And it means companies can purchase, deploy, and grow their use of software really, really easily. In today's world, you don't even need to go as far as engaging with a sales team. Like employees are able to find a product that solves their need, sign up with a credit card, and instantly that product is able to spread virally through that organization. My favorite reason for loving SaaS is the best SaaS products tend to spread and grow. So I love looking at net revenue retention as an important metric. If you had a cohort in a particular calendar year that at the beginning of that cohort started to spend $100 on that product, and you went a year later and you looked how much they're spending, if they're spending 90% or $90, you have an NRR of 90%, which means you have a little bit of a leaky bucket, which is not horrible. You can acquire new customers and you can continue to grow your business. But most SaaS businesses have higher than 100% NRR, which means that original cohort is spreading and growing naturally over time. And today, thanks to COVID teaching people what exponential growth means, if you have pretty aggressive growth rates, your growth is going to compound really, really quickly. For example, some of the top businesses today have net revenue retention over 130%. And Snowflake was at 158%, which was really, really loved by Wall Street. That means if they're adding new users and their old users are growing really, really quickly, their business, their revenue is going to compound super, super fast. And I think this is where some of the metrics that Ryo was calling out about like acquisition and churn all end up mattering. It's a really, really beautiful business model. In today's world, you're finding enterprise software companies are growing faster and bigger than ever. I just grabbed a list recently of some of the common ones out here, but these valuations are ginormous. And to the Instagram analogy that was shared at the beginning, Instagram sold to Facebook for $1 billion, which at the time felt really, really great. But now there's so many enterprise companies that are eclipsing well over $1 billion. Stripe is probably worth considerably more than 95 billion. That was just their last private valuation. I'll call out Databricks. Databricks spun out of a project at Berkeley and is one of the hottest enterprise software companies in the world today. The next thing that I'll highlight with enterprise software companies is when you're building a company, you have to go through some important milestones quite regularly. Fundraising, hiring, and growing are the ones that jump out to me the most. Fundraising seems to be a lot easier with enterprise products than consumer products, because investors can look at them and say, I understand the pain point. I understand that there are businesses willing to pay for this, and I understand what it's going to take for this business to grow. It's not as easy to predict, I think, on the consumer side. Hiring ends up being easier as well, because employees understand that enterprise companies can grow when they have certain product market fit. And similar to what was called out earlier with advertising, enterprise businesses have a pretty predictable payback period. It's going to take, even if it takes a year to break even with this customer, like how much we have to spend to acquire them, after that year, that customer is almost pure profit. So they're allowed to invest a lot into areas such as sales and marketing to drive their growth. The thing that I think is really fun about enterprise businesses today that might be a little bit different than what Ryo was saying in the deck earlier is the model for acquiring customers feels a lot more like consumer startups. You're selling much more to end users today than traditionally. Where a product like Salesforce might have sold to the IT organization, a product like Coda can go sell to an end user, or a user might use Coda for a personal case and then decide, hey, I'm going to go bring it into my business for work scenario. So that means you have much more unique ways of driving growth and fueling acquisition. And I'm going to tell you guys more about that as I give a little bit of a Coda walkthrough in a second. And the last part, I think it's really fun to build. Back when Salesforce was trying to grow, the best product managers and engineers in the world had to choose between working on really end user favoring products that were emphasizing design and beauty and usability, or really clunky enterprise software. And today you don't have that trade-off. Like, enterprise software has to be just as engaging to use. And that means you're working with the best engineers, the best designers to get these products built. And I think that's really fun. Aaron Levy, my old boss, wrote a really good article in TechCrunch all the way back in 2010 when enterprise software was considered to be super lame, but it was his advice for building really great enterprise tools. The first was make customers feel like they're part of your company. He tried a lot at Box to emulate the best service tactics that he saw from consumer companies like Zappos. The next is aligning revenue with customer success and consumption. You need to build something that people are excited to use every single day. The third bullet was build usable technology. It's related to the second, but if you pay attention to the little details in the best enterprise tools today, they obsess over things like design and user experience. The last one, or the second to last one, is Innovate Fast. Facebook was known a lot for move fast and break things, but enterprise software companies were typically known for 2 or 3 big releases a year. Now, most enterprise software companies are shipping features, weekly or daily sometimes. Lastly, you can go into organizations and ask them, what are your biggest problems? What are you struggling with? What workflows are broken? And if you find big, meaty problems, which, trust me, every enterprise company has lots of big problems, they will gladly pay money to help you solve them, which is the best part, I think, about enterprise software. So before jumping into Coda, can I pause really quickly and see if anyone has questions on the enterprise software overview?
Feel free to unmute yourself or use the raise hand function if you have a question.
All right, looks like I can jump ahead. So Serena was kind enough to let me use today to actually demo Coda to the team or to the class. And before I jump in, I'd love to figure out if anyone in the audience today uses some of these more modern productivity tools, things like Notion, Asana, Quip, etc. And feel free to type it in the chat. I'm keeping my eye open on the chat. All right, I'm seeing a lot of Notion, which is what I expected. This is great. Asana, Notion, awesome. Cool. Is anyone here using Google Docs regularly? All right, I'm guessing there's, yep, lots of yeses. Cool. My view is 99.9% of the world is still on Google Docs or Microsoft Office. And there's a big transformation happening in this category right now. And Notion and Coda are probably at the forefront of innovating what's going on in the document front. And it's really a fun and exciting space. So my goal today is to convince some of you, or hopefully all of you, to take a peek at Coda as your document of choice. And for those of you that are using Google Docs or Notion, that's kind of the target scenario. But you will see that Coda ends up extending much more into replacing things like Asana or project tracking tools as well. So yep, I see some eyeballs in the chat. Challenge accepted. So let me start at the 50,000 foot level. Coda is a new type of document, and it brings together the best elements of documents, spreadsheets, presentations, and applications into one place. Its long-term goal, the end vision, is to let anyone build a doc that's as powerful as an app. And when we started this company, which was back in 2014, there were 2 main observations driving it. The first, it was that the world runs on docs, not apps. When we looked around and asked people in enterprises how do they work, they usually rattled off 3 or 4 packaged applications like Salesforce or something like that. But when you actually looked at their monitors, their screens, they were spending all their day ping-ponging between documents and spreadsheets. And we actually thought that was good. You know, the advantage of documents is they're flexible, you can make them yours. But those tools, those docs and spreadsheets, literally had not involved since the 1970s. There's a lot of reason for that, but if you actually compare Microsoft Word or Google Docs side by side with the first word processor or the first spreadsheet tool, you'll find very little has changed. There's a new Chrome, there's a new UI, it's now in the browser, it's on your phone, but it's the exact same foundations. And we thought that was nuts when in that time period, every other piece of software had changed pretty substantially. So Coda decided we were going to start from scratch and rebuild the document from the ground up. I'll go through this really, really quickly, just so you can see about the history of the company. We were founded in 2014 as Krypton. We raised about $60 million in our first year from some really great investors like Reid Hoffman, who was the founder of LinkedIn. We officially launched Coda 1.0 in February 2019, and 2.0 was our kind of Doc for Teams launch, where we actually started collecting money for the first time. The company is about 165 people today, with 3 offices, Mountain View, San Francisco, and Bellevue, Washington. And since COVID, we allow people to work in any state. So we've got about 22 different states represented as well. All right, let's jump into the Coda product demo. So I'm going to walk you through the Coda building blocks in 3 sections. So first, we'll start off with Coda as a new type of document. One thing that we really lean into is Coda is just a doc. In fact, our name backwards spells a doc, and there is no learning curve to use Coda. If you know how to use Google Docs, or you know how to use basically any document editor today, you will be right at home in Coda. You'll find it's very familiar. It's a blinking cursor on a blank screen, but it's much more organized, right? So you've got on the left here a sections list that divides your document into pages and subpages, which is really, really convenient. You know, everyone hates a Google Doc that's 70 pages long and totally disorganized. There's some really cool new tricks about how you can publish a Coda doc to the web, which I'll show you in a second. And it has all of the things a great modern collaborative document editor has, which means, you know, everyone can be working on this at the same time. All the edits are synced in real time. It's super, super fast and performant and powerful. But the magic of Coda, in my opinion, starts when you play with tables for the first time. So tables in Coda look a little bit like an embedded spreadsheet, and they're really easy to add. I can just hit /table, and it'll add a new table in my document. But unlike a spreadsheet, which is very cell-oriented, and you can put anything in any cell, these tables behave much more like databases. So people that have used Airtable, or anyone here that's ever had to work with the database before, will understand the power that comes with databases. You have more structure, but you can create relationships between different tables. So this one is a really simple use case. It's a team working on a bunch of tasks, and you have a task name, an assignee, status. You have different column types, like this is a select list, this is a slider, this is a date picker, and you have a bunch more really cool column types like reactions or you know, images, attachments, etc. But when you start with an underlying table, if this is kind of our main source of truth, in Coda, you can create unlimited views of that same table. So this is that same table filtered down just to where the team is the mapping team. And here, the mapping team can create their perfect view of that, that same table. They can hide some columns, create additional columns, but any edit they make in one place will update anywhere else in that document. So you never have data going out of sync, and things are always up to date. You can then extend it further. So you can view a table in lots of different ways. Like this is a Gantt chart of that, that same data. So everyone attending Haas right now that's learning about the beauty of Gantt charts can get right at home in Coda. The executive working on this project can look at things in a pie chart. If people like seeing things as Kanban boards or calendars, like it's all the same underlying data, but you can view it however you want. I think that's super, super flexible and powerful. And then the final big reveal with Coda is when we transform your doc to behave much more like an application. So first, in Coda, you can write formulas anywhere. You're no longer constrained to just formulas in a table. And the formula language in Coda is based off of what you can do in spreadsheets. So I'll show you a quick example here. So if I'm in this table, I can just hit equals, and I can do due date plus 5, and it'll add 5 to every date in that column. But I can also write formulas in the canvas. So I can hit equals, and I'm jumped into that same formula builder. I can do 5 plus 5. I can do now and get the time, or I can do equals task for demo, which is that table above, and I can do a count. And this is telling me number of tasks. If I go here and just add a couple of rows, you'll see that that number has dynamically updated, right? So the data is constantly recalculating and staying live and up to date. I can go in a little bit further. Maybe my team wants to see in progress tasks. So I can say equals task for demo, and I'm going to do a filter on that data set, which filter is a much more kind of database command than it is a spreadsheet command, but I can say filter to where team equals, or actually, no, this time I'm doing status equals in progress, and I can do a count. And now I know there are 3 things that are in progress. If instead of a count, if I just hit enter, what I get is a string of all those 3 tasks that are currently in progress. And maybe I don't like the way that looks. Maybe I want to render this as a numbered list instead. So now I have a little dashboard for my team. This is everything that's in progress. If someone on my team says, hey, great, we just finished this task and marked it as done, my view is updated. So it allows you to really connect your data and your ideas and your summaries together. Next in Coda, we have a feature called buttons and controls. And this is one of the things that I think really starts to transform your doc to behave like an app. In Coda, you can add a button anywhere, in a table somewhere or in the canvas. And then when you add a button, you can set the action for what you want that button to do. Do you want that button to add a row, modify a row, send a notification, open a hyperlink, etc.? So you can see this button has a label that says add a task for select list 1 team. And it presets the value for whatever is in that select list. And that's this select list right here. So if I change this to mapping, I now have a button to add a task. Hello, task. And I'm going to assign this to myself, and I'm going to put the due date to be tomorrow. You will now see that task show up right here that I just added. So buttons make your doc really interactive, and they allow, when you're working with other people in your document, for them to know how to take the right action. For example, sometimes in a task list, you may say, I need you to mark this as done, and then I need you to go add another row to this other table to kick off this next flow. Instead of that being 2 separate tasks, you can create one button that is pressed, and it does both those actions for you. So you can build more and more powerful and useful things with buttons. Next, have any of you ever worked with a tool called Zapier? Zapier is an automation engine that allows you to write all sorts of really cool rule-based things. Like if this email arrives from this person, go send this notification in Slack. In Coda, you have an automations engine built into the doc. So if I have a project that I'm working on with a team and there's a task that's overdue, I can set something that says any overdue task, go remind that person every single day until they get it done. Or if every Monday I need to send a status update out to my boss, and this is what I want my status update to look like, I can create that view in Coda, and then once a week have that section automatically emailed out to my team. So automations let you kind of run your doc on autopilot. And then the last feature about Coda that I think is pretty unique from other products in the document space is called packs. And what packs do is they allow you to connect Coda to the outside world in all sorts of really cool and interesting ways. So we have right now about 60 different packs built. And when you connect to a pack, there's 2 things that happen. The first, you can sync data down from that application into Coda. So if I connect it to Gmail, I can sync down either all my messages or maybe messages to a certain email or a certain thread or a certain label. Or the packs feature let me take action on behalf of these applications. So I get, in this case, 2 new buttons. So if I connect it to Gmail, I can now literally send an email out of a doc or create a draft out of a doc. If I connect it to Spotify, I can sync down a table to figure out all my playlists or the top tracks I listen to, or I actually now have buttons that allow me to literally play or pause or stop my music. So some people could literally build a doc that says, we're hosting a party, go add your favorite songs here, and we're going to go upvote and downvote all the songs that we want to listen to during the party. So pretty unique on what you can do with packs. We're about to ship an SDK that will allow anyone to build a pack. So if there's an application that you care about, like maybe Berkeley has an internal system that you want to connect to, but you want that data synced into your planning process, or your to-do list, you can build a pack to do that, which will be pretty cool. So the neat thing about Coda, which is why I'm excited to talk in this enterprise software class, is we have a very unique go-to-market motion on how we get the product into the world. So I'm going to show you a few use cases and then show you a little bit about kind of that growth loop. So Coda today is used by tens of thousands of teams, everything from like small mom and pop shops all the way to really, really large enterprises. They all have their own unique deployments, like patterns and how docs spread. So like a classroom tends to be like this, where people are clustered around some docs. This might be like a big OKR or big planning doc within a company, but usually this is what Coda turns into, where you end up having lots of docs, some that are really big and used by lots of people, and others that are personal, like a one-on-one doc with that person and their manager. Coda spreads really virally through organizations. So once we land in a certain use case, we end up taking off really, really fast. So I'll show you one example. So I've got the Square one here. There was a woman at Square named Jenny Emick, and she was a design manager. And she was talking to her team, and her team was constantly saying, hey, I'm not getting enough real-time feedback. I need more coaching so I can develop and grow in my career. She also noticed this pattern that every designer had a Google Doc where they were tracking their feedback, but it was basically a one-on-one doc that was date notes, and everything was kind of buried in that document. There was no way to like organize and call out things. So she published a Coda doc to her team that was a template to running one-on-one docs. And you can see the first part of this document was almost like a blog post. It was a lot about the decisions behind why she organized it this way and why it's best for their career. But it was actually a template that was meant to be copied. And the document had different sections. It had a partnership agreement section where everyone kind of preset their expectations with them and their manager. They had a space to log all their meeting notes from each meeting or track action items. It had a space to track all of your career development goals, your peer reviews, your learning resources, etc. This document spread through her team and then took off like crazy throughout Square. We found out about it at Coda, and we realized like, boy, this is a much better way to do one-on-one docs. So we modeled our own one-on-one after it. And I think today, like lots and lots of different companies are using this this document to teach their teams how to manage that relationship. Another fun use case for Coda is a product team, right? So product teams have to coordinate lots of decisions. They're managing features and specs and all of that. And Figma is a super, super amazing startup doing really, really well. And their head of product used a doc in Coda that ran their entire product team. And he turned that into a template for the world. So his document, again, similar to the previous one, the first page is much more of like a blog post. It's teaching about the principles, but this is the full working implementation. When you hit copy doc, you're getting Yuki's entire setup. So you get all of the ways he set up the different tables, views, and formulas and all of that. And Yuki's really interesting insight is they would host weekly meetings to talk about key features. And he created two buttons. One button was if you had a question about a feature, you could press this button to raise your hand, and they would give space for you to ask your question. Or if there was a certain feature that you loved, you could press this heart button. Except he did something really cute. He said you could press this heart button as many times as you humanly want to. And that allowed people to really get excited about features that they thought were really going to make a big impact for their users. This document that Yuki created has been copied by a ton of different product teams. And this was like what seeded the growth of Coda through those different organizations. And eventually they can use Coda not just for running their product teams, but running their one-on-ones, planning processes, OKRs, all sorts of different use cases. Coda is really powerful and flexible, and you can do lots and lots of different things, but it's also just a simple blinking blank cursor. We want people to start with it for the most simple of use cases, and as they have more and more ideas, it will flex and grow with them. If you're new to Coda and this is compelling to you, you could just go to coda.io/learn. And there's a full guided tutorial to help you get the basics of Coda. And if you are a student, and we love students, there is a special thing where we give students free pro accounts for a year. So just click this apply now and we will get you set up with Coda. I'm going to pause on the product demo real quick and see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll jump into talking more about kind of how I think our growth loops are pretty unique for an enterprise company and what I'm seeing in the market today. All right, and feel free to jump in the chat if you have any reactions to this as a user of productivity software. Thoughts, questions? No one jump out all at once.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself or, oh, I see Anton raise your hand. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry, my camera doesn't work. I
no
have
problem.
like one of these sort of nightmarish questions
Sure.
for startup growth phase. And that is, well, okay, so there's Google Docs, which, you know, you are a doc.
Yep.
And they're like this big giant thing with 1 million product teams just on the Google Docs team alone. What if they wake up one day and decide to do like a Dropbox paper thing on you and start adding some of the stuff, stealing customers from you? How do you deal with that boot permanently? Well, I mean, emotionally more as a startup team. It's like, hey, these guys can turn around and start chasing us any moment, and they have the fuel, the gasoline to catch us.
Yep, it's a great question. When we started Coda, the majority of the questions we got from investors was, how are you going to fight off Microsoft and Google when they decide to go after the space? And today, when we talk to investors, we never get that question. It's usually like, how are you going to compete against the startups in the space? Because people are now really quickly switching to these tools, and we think that's a good thing. And you know, there was a big question many years ago: would anyone ever leave the Googles or the Microsofts? There was not enough compelling product out there for people to ditch what they were using. For the Google question in particular, I think it's really hard for them to adjust their product to compete with how Coda works, for example. They have a very strong user base that likes Google Docs exactly for how Google Docs works today. And for them to make pretty fundamentally shape-shifting decisions in their product is hard, right? So they can try to like tack on a few side features, and they've shipped, you know, this year they shipped, I think, like the ability to add voting in a document. But it's really like not easy to start from an existing thing. They have to build from scratch, and there's lots of internal dynamics within Microsoft, within Google, that you know, their existing business, you know, the Microsoft Office business is going to be cannibalized if they go launch a new competing product. So for whatever reason, you know, I think we're probably more focused on winning the users directly and probably competing much more with startups than we were worried about Google or Microsoft. But you know, comparing it to Box, like Box and Dropbox were very innovative many years ago. Like they were in the cloud, they were competing against pretty legacy tools, and Google Drive didn't exist. Microsoft didn't have a really strong offering in terms of online storage, and Microsoft and Google did catch up. Like they shipped pretty competing products, and that puts innovation pressure on Box and Dropbox to push further and move beyond that. Otherwise, you know, Microsoft and Google can just give that stuff away. So yeah, does that answer your question? Like, I think it's something that we always have to be aware of, but if we keep our focus on the end user and keep innovating, it will not be as easy for Google to just kind of copy the product.
Totally, thank you.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. So related to that, I'm going to talk a little bit, let me see if this loads correctly. Can you guys see this, this growth, these two loops?
Yes.
So we have a pretty unique philosophy on how Coda grows. And actually, as background, before I get into this, I'll tell you a little bit about Shashir. So Shashir's one of our co-founders, and he's our CEO. Before joining or starting Coda, he actually ran the YouTube products at Google, and he joined YouTube when it was a new acquisition, not very successful business, and helped turn it into, you know, one of the most used web products in the world. He's the guy that, in my opinion, created skippable ads as a concept, and all of us obviously love skippable ads. So I credit him for saving us all that time. But the more unique thing he did at YouTube was orient all of YouTube around creators. back in the day when YouTube was first a product, everyone thought it was kind of a joke. And in Shashir's view, he thought YouTube one day was going to compete with the Disneys, the ESPNs, like the big giant Hollywood video studios. And he got laughed out of the room anytime he mentioned that, because all YouTube had was cat videos. What Shashir pointed out is the world was underestimating the creativity of humans, and people, if you give them simple tools to be able to produce content and upload it and get it to an audience, they're going to get really interesting stuff created. And you look today, like kids are growing up saying, I want to be a YouTuber, I'm going to create a following on YouTube. And it's happening. There's lots of people that are making a living off of YouTube. And what YouTube did was say, you don't have to be a Hollywood studio to create content. We're going to democratize that process and let anyone do it. And people say, like, how do you go from, cat videos to building productivity software? Like, what's the big, connection there? And Shashir's mind, it's the same thing. What we're doing is the same thing to software. Today, all of the world's software is created by a really small percentage of people. It's just the people that can, build software, engineers, product managers, etc. But what if anyone in the world could build a doc as powerful as an app? Our vision is that will change the software landscape quite entirely. So jumping to like how Coda is used, it starts as a document, and then people end up building much more powerful tools and custom things to run their teams much more effectively. One of my favorite stories, you can see this in the gallery, Coda gallery inventory. So there's this guy, Ben Lee, and he worked at REI, and he was a manager in a store that rented out bikes, and Ben's published a lot of docs. Where's his inventory doc? They rented out bikes and tents and all of that, and they had really terrible systems. It was all paper and pencil. And Ben was one of our early beta users, and he realized he could use Coda to build an inventory tracker. So he spent an afternoon and he built a really simple inventory tracker that allowed people to check things in, check things out, log when something needed repairs, rolled it out to a store, and it was amazing. It was super successful. All the employees used it. He had to do something crazy. REI was totally on Microsoft, O365. They didn't use Gmail, and Coda could only be used with Gmail at the time. So he created his own domain name just so his store could use it. And his CIO at REI, I think, found out and said, what the heck is this guy doing? Rolling out software, creating domain names, like, this is nuts. Tried to shut it down. And Ben's manager went and kind of fought for him and said, like, look, if I went to you and said, we need an inventory tool, you're going to spend months and months trying to build something. You're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's Ben. He created a perfect tool for us in an afternoon, and it works exactly the way we want. And that's kind of like Shashir's idea of what we're doing is we're letting the people closest to the problem build tools that feel and function much more like software without the barriers of I need to be an engineer to do it. If you look at our users today and you ask them about Coda, a third of our users will usually compare us into this doc category. They'll say, I use Coda because I think it's my best writing surface. I like it more than Google Docs or Quip or something like that. The next third of our users realize that they're never going to go back to Google Sheets again. Like, Coda is a much better spreadsheet, a much better database. They'll compare us much more to this structured data category. And then another section of our users will realize, like, I can build my own CRM, or I can build my own task tracker in Coda, and I don't have to ping pong between different pieces of software. Sometimes they'll actually use Coda alongside some of these tools. So we have a connector to Greenhouse, which is an applicant tracking system. So our recruiting team at Coda, we love Greenhouse. We use it as our source of truth, but all of our pipeline syncs and our weekly meetings happen in Coda because that live data goes in and changes and updates. So our view is this should not be three different categories. We think it should just be one category, and people can build and flex the tool they need depending on the problem they're trying to solve. So the picture that I was trying to show you guys before on how we grow, we monetize through people, usually businesses, paying for Coda seats. So we'll go into an org, someone will pick up Coda, they'll start to use it, they'll build a doc and they share it with their team. And usually they're sharing it with people who are editors, collaborators, or viewers in their document. But some of these people turn around, they say, oh, I really like that tool, I'm going to make my own doc. And it kind of spreads like this. But sometimes this group, someone here will say, I built something that I think is useful to other people, just like Ben's inventory doc was useful, and they'll turn it into a template. Those templates get indexed by the search engines, they get shared by influencers. It's very similar to the motion of I'm going to upload a video to YouTube, or I'm going to post a blog post on Medium, or I'm going to go try to tweet to drive up my thought leadership or build up my own personal brand. It's a really useful way to get ideas out to the world. And that just excites people about a different use case on how they can use Coda. So these types of growth loops are not typical enterprise software loops. These are consumer loops. This is how a product like Facebook or Instagram will spread and acquire more users. But we get to monetize the way a tool like Salesforce, enterprise company, can monetize. So it's pretty neat in that regard. I'm seeing some good questions in the chat. Anton's asking if there's scripting support for more involved use cases. Yeah, Coda goes really, really deep. So we have an API. Our formula language is built off of the types of things that you'll find in modern programming languages like JavaScript. And if you understand some really cool programming concepts like formula maps, etc., you can build those sorts of things into Coda. I'm not an engineer, so I don't use the most powerful things you can in Coda, but I will do things like create a button to go push other buttons, like similar to how you might do that in a piece of software, but I don't have to write any code to make that happen. I think, Serena, that just about runs through most of my prepared presentation. For those of you that are interested in learning more about Coda, you can sign up for a free account. You can do a ton of things with the free account, and then go to the gallery, which is kind of like our app store of tons of pre-built documents and templates for all sorts of various use cases. And if you see something that's neat, you can click it, copy it, bring it into your doc, and it'll work really well for you. Okay. Should we open it up to more Q&A?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Kenny, for the presentation. And then now we can turn into the Q&A section. So anyone who are interested to ask Kenny a question, please feel free to turn your camera and then unmute yourself, or use the raise hand function, or also send a message in the chat box.
Cool, and feel free to take the questions any direction, startups, Coda, anything like that.
Yes, I see Fernanda raise your hand, and feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, just like well, my thoughts are after finding out about Coda. Like, I see it's a really great product. Like, I myself run a team of people, so I probably use it because Notion sometimes doesn't give us what we really want to use,
Mm-hmm.
Well, like, something that confused me though is that I was looking at the website, and it's like create a doc. So the way like it's kind of like shared to people, like the way it's promoted, it's like as docs, but it's not actually a doc. So I don't know, that kind of like put me off a bit. Yeah, like it confused me a bit. Yeah.
It's a really great point you raise. I can tell you more the reason why we describe Coda as a doc. So the way I just showed you the demo, we could be describing Coda as much more powerful than a doc. We could be describing it as a no-code builder, or an app builder or something like that. But we think that finding the tool that people turn to the most simple, flexible tool, and allowing them to build up from there leads to the best outcomes, for the user and for us. So we talk about this as Coda having a really good, low floor, but a very high ceiling. I can give you one example. One enterprise customer, they used Coda for this really complicated use case. It was around every engineer and what project they were working on for the month. And this is like public company, one of the top tech companies in the world. Every month, all the engineering managers go into this doc, they'd go organize what everyone was working on, and then they'd leave. The people that use this doc, they loved it because they built a really unique and custom scenario for them. And they paid us a good amount of money just to be able to use Coda just for this one document. But the thing that drove us crazy internally is none of those users realized they could use Coda for their one-on-one doc or task tracking or planning. They just thought Coda was this like, app builder for this project planning scenario. Compare that to the Square use case. The one-on-one doc was not super complicated, like didn't use any formulas, didn't use anything that was really, some of our superpower features, but it spread like crazy to the people at Square. And then the folks that wanted something more powerful realized like, wow, this thing can flex in lots of other directions. So it's very much an intentional strategy of leaning into the doc. But I have probably argued many times that I think we should be talking about Coda more as a spreadsheet replacement, et cetera, because I'm so passionate about what it can do beyond that.
Got it. Yeah, I see. It totally makes sense now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, if you look at our landing page, our funny tagline is "Enough of this sheet," which is more poking fun at spreadsheets than it is at a document. But we do like the doc metaphor a lot. For people that are used to Notion, there's actually a very big difference between Coda and Notion. Notion, their core metaphor is a wiki, right? You see all of your stuff in one thing. When you fire up Notion, you look at that left-hand pane, it's got everything. And that works really, really well for individuals and small teams where you kind of want to see that. But businesses and enterprises, I think they're run by thousands of documents. Like you have some docs that are really shared for a small group of people, some that are company-wide. So Coda being a doc similar to like a Google Doc, you can think about your sharing model much more like a Google Doc. I can share it with this one individual, with this group, with the entire company, with the whole world, which I think for us is why we're seeing a lot of success with Coda within enterprises, where they just have so much information and so many different teams.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question from the chat. Oh, sorry. Does someone want to ask?
Cool. I think there's a question in the chat from Paul,
Yeah.
Who's asking, how did I go from studying econ to being the head of finance and working in a startup like Coda? So my favorite thing about startups is it's very much a meritocracy. You can join an early stage startup and there's so much work, there's so many problems that need to be solved and not enough resources going around, that I think they give you the best opportunity to stretch and grow and make an impact. Like when I joined Box, I had no business being head of recruiting in a fast growing startup. I had never done that before, but Aaron, the founder, had a lot of confidence in me and said, I'm going to give you a chance to do this. And I was able to really grow in that role and build a team and build a company. When I joined Coda, Shashir initially put me into a bit of a stretch role, which was running after recruiting and HR. And I'd never done HR before, but I figured, hey, I could learn and take some time to go figure those things out. And one day he came to me and said, hey, I want you to run the full G&A function. And I told him, look, I don't know much about a P&L. I don't know much about finance. And he said, nope, it's okay. I'll help you figure it out. You can learn. So I think there's certain startups where they just give you the right level of mentorship and support to do that. And I think it's much easier to make those leaps in small companies than it is, a larger company like Google, where they're so big, they have to put people in pretty defined swim lanes and roles and focus areas. So from a learning and development standpoint, I think you can learn at a much faster clip. The giant asterisk I'll say is like, you have to pick your startup as well as you can. Like there's some that do really well and grow quickly and they have great teams and they'll push you and their cultures are really strong. And there's others that may not give you that level of opportunity. And it is challenging to know how to identify that. I think I got totally lucky with Box. I thought the product was cool. I loved that they had free lunch every day. And I thought they had a good business model, but when I joined, I did not predict that they were going to go from tiny to gigantic in just a short amount of time. There's quite a bit of luck in startups as well. Thanks, Paul. That's a great question. The main thing in that is just work hard, be passionate, be really diligent about doing whatever you can to help push the mission of the company forward. And in startups, that will take you really, really far.
Okay, and then I think we can move on to the next question. Anyone else are interested in asking a question? Anton is asked, and then there's 2 questions in the chat box.
Sure. Are you hiring interns or new grads in product roles? Yeah, we totally are. Last summer, we had design interns and engineering interns. If you mean product management in specific, I don't think we've had a PM intern yet, but I suspect next summer we would be open to it. And we're definitely hiring new grads. So please do check out our career pages, coda.io/jobs. I'll post that in the chat. That is actually a Coda doc that's published as a website, fun fact. But yeah, totally. And then Paul has a question. Can you elaborate a little on your angel investor activities? How did you decide to do it? How do you approach it? So I'm not a super active angel investor. I think there's some people that have a lot of time and a lot of capital and they're doing it almost as a full-time job. For me, I'm constrained by the fact that I love working at Coda. I love my team, love my job. I'm not going to be leaving at any point, but I'm just intellectually curious to stay in touch with what's going on in tech. And my main motivation for being an angel investor is to connect regularly with very hungry entrepreneurs that are trying to solve big problems. And my way of helping them is to share some of the experiences I've had with Box and with Coda and with hiring and all of that. And I don't do it as a way of making money necessarily. Like usually if you're an angel investor, the advice is to assume that all that money is going to disappear. But some of them hit, some of them turn out to be really, really successful someday. And some of them turn out to be totally nothing. And I think it's okay. For me, maybe one day I might consider changing careers. Maybe I'll want to be an institutional investor at a venture capital firm or something like that. Or I'll continue to want to be an operator and use angel investing as a way to just stay connected with founders. So it's just creating that little bit of opportunity to learn and stay abreast of what's going on. And the question of how did I approach it? I was fortunate to get invited to join a program held by First Round Capital called Angel Track. And they use it as a way of teaching operators like me the basics about angel investing. So it was a really amazing, I think, 2-month immersive learning experience. And I met a great community, and I'm still very active in that community. We share deals with one another. We talk about the questions that are on top of our mind, and it's a great way of learning as we all develop. Catherine has a question. Do you consider Coda a diverse, equitable, and inclusive company? How do you maximize the DEI value in both user and manager sides? It's a great question. We care a ton about DEI. We talk about it regularly as a company. The way we run our company has many thoughtful things from our values and our culture that I think reflect this well. I think the first one that I'll call out, you can often see how a company approaches diversity by just how they run. And for us, we put a ton of emphasis in our meeting culture. So in every meeting that we run, I'll share my screen in a second, and I'll show you guys this. We have this ritual that we call Dory and Pulse. And if you open up a Coda doc and you just press /Dory, you can pull it up. And this allows us, for example, to have everyone submit a question, upvote the ones that they care about. Everyone's too nice to use the downvote buttons, but it allows the questions that people care about the most to fly to the top. And similarly, we often have sentiment checks in every meeting. So you go to a meeting, you can add a sentiment. How do you feel about this topic? Feeling great. And it allows it to show up in an even playing field with the rest of the company, which really drives home our ideas, that great ideas can come from anywhere. So being inclusive with how we run our one-on-ones and our meetings that allow people that are earlier in their career, or maybe they're generally shy and quiet, they don't want to jump in a 70-person Zoom meeting, they can still get their really interesting thoughts and ideas out to the company. We spend a lot of time thinking about DEI from a hiring standpoint and building a diverse team, bringing in people of lots of different backgrounds and work experiences and approaches. We think that leads to the best ideas and the best community within our company. We also spend a lot of time thinking about our user base from a diversity standpoint. Are the people that are publishing docs and evangelizing Coda coming from a different, a broad set of backgrounds and communities, and that allows Coda to spread in really, really interesting ways. There's probably some pretty cool docs in our template gallery that are great reflections of how some of our users are using Coda to promote the DEI ideas out in the world, which is pretty fun to explore as well. Catherine, does that answer your question? Great, thank you. All right, Jason, speaking of startups, what tips do you have for finding roles in a startups, especially when it seems to be like people with more experience are the ones that are getting hired? It's a great question. The first thing that I would recommend for students at Cal is while you're in school, it is the best time ever to start a company. You don't have a full-time job, you don't have lots of commitments outside, and you are surrounded by really, really smart, hungry people. When I was I think I was a junior, me and some friends tried to start a company that was designed to be like a collaboration space for students. And one thing I found is like student startups tend to have like student ideas, which is okay. You're trying to solve problems you're exposed to. But the thing that it's really exposing you to is like, how do you learn to build something? How do you learn to ship something? In today's world, no-code tools allow you to ship things really, really easily. Products like Coda or Bubble or applications like this will let you take something that's an idea and ship it into a working product in a matter of days. So I would say do it, and that will give you some of the raw skills that startups like Coda are looking for. So for us, we love when people earlier in their career are makers, they're going out and building products, they're getting their ideas out there. It shows a level of passion and tenacity and willingness to solve problems. And then, just be proactive, reach out, engage with companies. I've found that I've made a bunch of hires recently from young folks that reach out to me on Twitter, which I think is super, super cool. I would have thought LinkedIn is the way you make all the hires, but I'm finding I'm connecting with more interesting people on Twitter these days. I think the biggest question that you have to think about is, do you start your career in a company like a Google or a Microsoft, which will teach you a lot and help develop a certain set of skills, or do you start it in a startup, which I think is just a different opportunity? And it's not that one is better than another, they're both just different, and you just got to find out which one gets you more excited.
Hey, Kenny, I have a quick question on recruiting.
Sure.
Oh, also, I have some Coda merch.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I'm repping.
I would love to see that.
Oh, it's the thing.
That is a great water bottle. I remember when we ordered those.
Yeah.
We love Coda swag.
Yeah. So since you were like head of recruiting at Box when you guys were very young, I think recruiting is like a big issue. Like I've been thinking about, how do you approach like recruiting at a young startup, and like what do you look for in those people? Just like all across, like recruiting at an early stage startup.
Yeah, it's a great question. So for Coda, our number one signal is kind of the affinity for a person to be a maker. So for example, it's really easy when someone who is an active Coda user, they're active in our community, they're publishing docs or engaging with their users, comes in and says, I want to work at Coda, because there's so much opportunity for us to deploy that skill set, whether it's in a customer facing role, whether it's a promotion or marketing role, even in the recruiting team. Like we have to run lots of complicated processes, and we require people on our team to be really sophisticated at finding efficient ways to organize and stay on top of stuff. So I think if there's a particular startup that you want to go work at, being a big fan of the product will go a super, super long way. It just shows that level of passion and conviction.
I meant more on like as a founder recruiting.
Yeah. Got it. As a founder, so I think that's literally what our founder looks for. Like they, both Shashir and Alex care a lot about passion for it. What we do when we're interviewing people is we ask people to actually show off their work. Like show us something that you've built that you're really, really proud of. We're not the type of company that like puts people in a bunch of, you know, case study interviews or brain teasers. We think that work product is going to speak a lot more about their work. And if you have examples of when I was in college, I built this, I did this, this is what I'm working on. These are my side projects. One engineer that I hired during COVID, I met him because he was really concerned about the lack of ventilators during the early pandemic. And he was building a project to help people manufacture cheap but effective ventilators with pretty accessible products. He had published that as a document. I went and I connected with him, and turns out like he's this really, really amazing, passionate student. And I think he was at Columbia who loved Coda and just happened to decide to use it to publish the product. But turns out he's also an amazing engineer, amazing product thinker, and I'm so lucky we hired him. So we really look for any kind of signal or spark that shows that this person's going to come in and be able to make a big impact.
Thank you, Kenny.
Yep, no problem, Aaron.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Looks like someone raised their hand.
Yes. Aizen or
Aizen?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here and all your advices. My question is not related that much from what we discussed, like you discussed today, but so I'm working on a product, like hardware product, and I did a prototype and I'm using prototype myself to test it. But right now I want to, thank you, I want to test it out and give it to others and to test it. And I'm thinking like a lot of people telling me you have, so I want to patent it now. A lot of people telling me like you have to patent it after manufacturing, but I don't, because the manufacturing needs a lot of initial cost. I'm thinking to first patent it and give it others to try it to see if it's sample fit and then manufactured. I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a lawyer, so you should always talk to a lawyer for advice like this. But my main thought is hardware, unfortunately, is like a different endeavor than software. It's like really expensive to build and manufacture and front the capital to build it at scale. So before you patent it, what I would recommend is making sure you're seeing really strong product market fit, like some level of pull. So get your early prototypes built, get it in the hands of users, make sure you can find out that they really like it, they want to pay for it, they will use it for a long time. And if so, then I would recommend getting initial capital, because running a patent process is not cheap. It's really time consuming. At Coda, we've patented a bunch of our technology, and we did it in the background, but it was never a focus. Like we did patents a reasonable time after we started, and we spent most of our time figuring out, like, are we building something that users are really going to like and want to pay for? So that's probably my 2 cents on the sequencing there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good luck with your product. I love you're building that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions? I actually have a question.
Sure.
Yes. So Berkeley has like a very diverse students base, and many of them are international students coming from like all over the world. And then some of the students here, like they might have questions, even myself, like asking like whether to do like a startup back in their home country or should they do in the US, and what are the considerations that the student should working on that, and then maybe how we will suggest to overlap like the gap between like the two different sides of the
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not an expert in how international startup communities are going, but I think the good thing is they're going better and better. COVID especially has been a really big accelerant to show that people can work from anywhere effectively and teams can be productive in that sense. So there's a lot of reason to say, like, if you want to do a startup in your home country, you absolutely can. But the US has many advantages from lots of different facets. I think the first one is here in the US, we actually like encourage people to do startups. There's no penalty of like, I did a startup and I failed. It's not looked at as like your career is destroyed. So you're not faced with that same career stress about taking that first attempt to try it. Next, I think access to capital is tremendous here. There is so much venture capital. Berkeley has lots of programs to try to fund startups coming out of Berkeley, and there's Sandhill in Silicon Valley that has all the best venture capitalists that are eager to meet people starting new ideas. There's a lot of belief and faith in young entrepreneurs, that people straight out of school who aren't jaded by what they've seen in the enterprise and the world come up with really interesting, fresh ideas. So I think you'll find a lot of support in the ecosystem of like getting started. And then I think a big challenge startups run into is team building. It's hiring, and there's great access to talent in the US, whether it's technical talent, non-technical talent. You can scale quite easily. Internationally, you can. There's just different constraints in different geographies. So my recommendation is, if you like it here and you're able to start a company here, that you'll have lots of support. I have a ton of frustration with the US immigration policy in general, where we're spending all this investment letting people come to the US and go through our education system, and then we make it impossible for them to get a visa to stay here, to start companies, to work in startups. Like it's so hard for Coda, for example, to get work visas for international students in certain roles. And I hope that the US can keep innovating in that, because I think it's our immigrant entrepreneurs, for example, that are driving so much innovation in our country. I'm seeing some head nods in the audience, so at least with Jin. So I think there's some agreement there.
Yes. I think that's all my questions. And then our class has to move on for other activities. And then we want to say thank you very much for joining us today. And then we really greatly appreciate your time to share your knowledge with our class.
Thank you, Serena. Thanks everyone for the time, for listening, for all the great questions. This was a lot of fun, and I have so much love for Berkeley and all the students there. It's really an honor for me to come back and get to share some of these experiences with all of you. And if any of you ever want to stay in touch, connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and I'll paste my email in the chat as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
And we can move on to logistics. So we have another interview assignment too, which is due next Thursday before class. This will be will be the same instructions as the one that is due today before class. So each team member will need to conduct one interview, and then you are only submitting your own responses. And then the reflection is required. And then if the recording is capable, then please also have that uploaded on B course.